The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Bronxnet or the program underwriters.
Time for the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronxnet's program where we talk to journalists, editors, writers, photographers, videographers, anybody involved in Bronx media, and try and give you some insight into what's going on. And tonight, we really have kind of the whole spectrum, because we have somebody who is a veteran reporter, editor, publisher, Pulitzer Prize winner. And then in our second segment, we have somebody who, in essence, is brand new, I guess, intern or young journalist for the Norwood News. So we're going from one end to the other. Let's start with my longtime friend, Bernard Stein, who is former editor, publisher, man about town of the Riverdale Press, and now actually retired, but nice to always have Buddy Stein in the program. How are you, sir?
Hi, Gary. I'm fine. It's nice to be with you.
Great. Thank you so much. The reason I reached out to Buddy, because I thought it would be worthwhile to find somebody who had some kind of long-term perspective on the news that came about this week that Congressman José Serrano will not seek re-election, and also the very sad and unfortunate news that he has Parkinson's disease. And so let's just start with a general question, Buddy, and that is, what kind of a congressman was he? Was he effective for the people of the South Bronx? And then we can break down some of the issues and other things.
He was particularly effective, I think, in the area of the environment. Without him, the Bronx River would probably still be an open sewer. He brought millions and millions and millions of dollars to the restoration of the Bronx River and the creation of the South Bronx Greenway. He was also instrumental in bringing funds, this is still working itself out, but funds to study tearing down the Sheridan Expressway. He was an early opponent of the South Bronx incinerator, a vigorous opponent of it. And in honor of South Brother Island was purchased with funds that he procured from the federal government. So in all those ways, he was a tremendous advocate for improving the environment in the South Bronx. And to honor him, as you probably know, the Bronx River Alliance named the first beaver.
The beaver, yes, I knew you were going to say that.
Show up in the city limits of New York since the 19th century, named that beaver Jose.
Jose, there you go. Maybe I should have started with this, although every word that you said there, I think rings true. And you check the check marks on the checkbox. And say, yep, he did this, 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 and this. But the fact is, just his mere presence in the House of Representatives was a big change. I mean, he's, a very distinctive Puerto Rican representative, and I know he wore that mantle very proudly. And he really, in wherever he could, would influence his colleagues so they understand the nature of, Puerto Rico, who Puerto Rican people were, the fact that they are Americans, all those things. And I think in terms of cultural identity and representing that in Washington, he gets to check that box that he was the first and the most vocal about it.
Well, he was the second.
I'm sorry.
He succeeded Bobby Garcia.
Oh, Bobby Garcia, that's right, of course. I should have realized right away, you're right.
He was the first Puerto Rican elected to Congress, and then sadly was caught up in the WedTech scandal,
right.
Indicted.
Right. I guess that's why I passed him over in my mind.
Yeah. So he was forced to resign, and at that point, José Serrano ran for Congress. He was an assemblyman,
right.
And he ran for Congress and was elected. And now it's been 45 years, I think, that he's been in the Congress. And you're right, he's proud of his Puerto Rican heritage. He's born in Puerto Rico. He's probably a little sad today if he read the story about President Trump grumbling about Puerto Rico getting any kind of help getting food, about the cuts in food stamps to Puerto Ricans. My own sense is that the president may not have gotten the message that Puerto Rico is part of the United States.
Well, it's funny you say that. José Serrano, we were talking about that, I was asking him about cultural identity and, do colleagues from states, Midwest or other places, maybe in the South, who don't fully understand what Puerto Rico is. And he said, I had a House of Representatives, a Congress member come up to me and ask me if the next time I go to Puerto Rico, could I get Puerto Rican money so they could have samples of Puerto Rican money. So he said, so I took a dollar bill out of my pocket and I put it on the desk. But that was the kind of prejudice or lack of information, I guess, that he lived with for a very long time. I just think it's ironic, and we don't want to necessarily get into the potential field because there will be people who are going to run for his seat. But I think it's ironic that some of the people who are considering challenging him are doing so because they think he's not progressive enough. This would be the most liberal, the most left-handed, the most progressive thinking representative for his entire career in the House of Representatives, right? I mean,
that's certainly true. I mean,
it's incredibly ironic.
He brought Hugo Chavez to the point.
That's right.
In 2005. The very controversial president of Venezuela, and then 10 or so years later, to commemorate that journey of Hugo Chavez to the South Bronx, he brought the foreign minister of Venezuela in 2016 to the point.
And let me just interject. Didn't he cut an oil deal with Venezuela to provide cheap heating oil for the people of the South Bronx? I believe that's the case.
Whether
look it up.
He
I'm giving you
cut that
something
deal
to look
or not,
up.
I don't know, but it is certainly the case that Venezuela's oil cartel provided inexpensive heating oil to
I think he
poor
did.
people in the Bronx
Right.
for many, many years.
One thing that you mentioned to me on the phone, and I don't have a personal recollection of it, and you said you go back to the day when José Serrano was actually an assembly member. I've read about it. Is there anything to talk about?
He owes me a pen. I tease him when I see him that he owes me a pen because the very first major expose that the Riverdale Press did when I was its editor, 1985-86, was the first investigation of corruption of community school boards.
Wow.
And in response to that expose, then Assemblyman Serrano introduced the first legislation to try to curb some of the most egregiously corrupt practices on the community school boards. The Serrano Law was a measure that prohibited any employee of public school system from serving on a community school board, and also said that any politician who held another public office couldn't serve on a community school board. That was an effort to curb some of the patronage that we found in this investigation. And he promised me at the time that when Governor Mario Cuomo signed the bill, I would get one of those pens from signing, and then he forgot.
And he forgot.
So
But you still remind
I
me.
see him.
I'll tell you, you're going to have a hard time getting the former Governor Cuomo's pen at this point. I don't think that's about to happen. Now,
No, I don't think it's going to happen either. But I do tease him about it. But it was really a very important thing
right.
that he responded to this expose, and this was well before the daily newspapers started investigating other community school boards. We were investigating Community School Board 10 in the Northwest Bronx, and that he responded to it, and he responded to it successfully with legislation that at least began to nibble away at the corruption.
Forgive me because I didn't think of this prior, but when you mentioned his record, we're talking about Congressman José Serrano, who announced his retirement. And when you mentioned his record on the environment, as I recall, when you were at the Riverdale Press, you did I think an expose of incinerators in the South Bronx.
Again,
and then I want to ask what his role might have been in that whole process, if you can tell us all about it. I'm sorry I didn't look it up because I didn't think of it till this moment, but remind us.
Well, in the mid-'90s, the largest medical waste incinerator in the state of New York was built in Port Morris.
Right.
And Riverdale Press did a major series of investigations and exposés.
Right.
And our coverage of the incinerator made its way to the South Bronx, where it served as one of the calls to the community to organize itself. And the South Bronx Coalition for Clean Air was formed and fought for years to finally successfully to prove that contrary to what the state regulators said, that the incinerator was fouling the air and endangering the health of people nearby. And Serrano was a vigorous and an early opponent of the South Bronx incinerator when the local people had been hoodwinked by the chair and another member of Community Board 1 who had falsely claimed that the Community Board had voted for the incinerator. We ultimately did a story that showed that the chair of the board had taken $50,000 from the developer. And
you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, and as a result of our story, the developer was indicted. They used the Al Capone. They took the Al Capone route, and the feds indicted him for tax evasion.
There you go. Listen, buddy, we're essentially out of time. I guess so. We'll wish Congressman Serrano well, and I know both you and I will agree that we were sorry to hear that he's contracted a condition, and we only wish him good health and long life and doing it the right way, because he's been a very important figure in the borough of the Bronx.
He has indeed, and of course I wish him well, and I hope whoever it is who succeeds him will be as vigorous an advocate for the neighborhood as he was.
Great. Thank you so much, Bernard Stein, buddy. Always great to have you with us, and we'll see you around town, I'm sure.
It's my pleasure, Gary.
Great. Okay, there you go. Bernard L. Stein, former editor and publisher of the Riverdale Press. As I said, we go from one end of a spectrum to another, and I'm not going to put one higher or lower. They're just at both ends. One maybe the most well-known and long-time veteran journalist in the borough of the Bronx, and now we go to one of the brand new ones, and we're going to take a break, and you will join Emily Suzanne Lever, who is a writer for the Norwood News. Don't go away.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self, and I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go along, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, it's Ava, and this is Tess from Vivo's Do It Yourselfie, where we recreate the hottest looks from today's biggest music videos.
After cleaning out our closet, we have a lot of clothes we don't wear anymore.
Like this old t-shirt.
It's not garbage, it's actually a brand new rug.
And to make it, all you need to do is cut, tie, and glue.
Cut the t-shirt into strips.
Tie the strips into knots.
And glue the knots to the bath mat. I love it. Give your garbage another life.
And recycle.
Back with you on the Bronx Buzz. And as I said, we're going to a relatively new reporter, someone who actually is going to be on Skype from the CUNY Journalism School, I guess, where she goes to school. So let me say good evening to Emily Suzanne Lever, and she joins us on Skype. Hi, Emily. How are you?
I'm good, Gary. How are you?
Good. We're doing fine. Are you in a classroom? Are you in a hallway? Where are you?
I'm in the big newsroom, so if you hear any noise, that's what it is.
All right. No news is good news. That's what we always say. Anyway, Suzanne, so nice to talk to you. I've been reading some of the things you've been writing in the Norwood News. Just a little background. Where are you from? We'll start very simply.
I'm from the D.C. area.
Okay. At what point in your life did you say, hey, I think I want to pursue journalism?
Very early on, I started out wanting to be an arts and culture writer. I wrote a lot of sort of analytical type of pieces, and then I started to become more interested in the political implications of the things I was writing about, things that required reporting. I wrote a piece for Deadspin about the Paris Olympics and the sort of the urban policy implications of that, and how the excitement around this big sports event was being used to cover up outrageous profiteering. So that's kind of what got me excited about reporting.
Wow. But it sounds like if you wrote something for Deadspin, this wasn't something you did in grade school. This was college or somewhere, even high school. So I just kind of put it in.
That was in 2017, yeah.
In 2017. And so that was really what got you started. And I guess we can extract from that your favorite kind of reporting then would be investigative or political investigations, that kind of thing? Or do you have other interests?
Yeah, I'm definitely into investigative reporting.
So now you are, I don't want to make an assumption, I think I said it earlier in the program, but you are an intern at the Norwood News technically, or that's part of your internship as part of your education?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you started with us in the fall or in January? When did you get started?
In January.
How's it been? Well, I'm always interested in people's impressions from other places when they come to the Bronx. What's it like to be here? What's it like to be covering it? Just anything. Tell me something about what your experience has been.
I think it's really exciting. And I think the Bronx just doesn't get as much coverage as Manhattan. So I think it's really great to feel like I'm contributing to the community in a big way, because hyperlocal reporting, that's something that people actually read. From what I can gather, like that is what people look to know what's going on in their community board, what legislation is being passed in the city council or elsewhere that might affect them directly. Like this hyperlocal angle, I think is like very valuable. I know that it's very fashionable to care about local news right now, but it's definitely always been important, and I feel very lucky to be able to get my feet wet in reporting in this kind of context.
You know, I've been in the Bronx, obviously, for a very long time, and you couldn't have said truer words. We are completely underserved by media, and we're talking about 1.4 million people, and we have maybe, three weeklies and a couple of weeklies, which I don't minimize their importance, that are managed by, I guess, the Hunter College and the CUNY J School and all that. So we are completely underserved. So I guess for a young reporter, there must be some gratification to know, as opposed to just kind of filing a story in a paper, what you write really has impact and people really read it, because they're here in the Bronx, we're starving for news. That must be gratifying.
Right, because I know that if I don't cover something, it probably is not going to get covered, in the Norwood News coverage area. Something may not get covered if the Norwood News doesn't address it. So.
And you're dealing with 250,000 people, which is as large as Dayton, Ohio, or something like that.
Right.
Let's talk about a couple of stories that you've done. I really thought the two stories you did on the Kingsbridge shopping strip were fascinating. The first one, so people are reading it. I'm reading it. The first one was about the fact that rents are going up, and certainly they're feeling squeezed out. They have no protections. Then we're talking about merchants on Kingsbridge Road. And then the second one, which just came out the other day, is that there is a package of legislation in this, or coming up in the city council that may provide some relief. So why don't we start there? Why don't you tell me a little bit about what that legislation could be and how it might impact the situation those merchants have found themselves in?
Okay, so the package of bills in the small business committee of the city council right now, that includes a certificate of no harassment bill for commercial tenants. So that would mean commercial landlords, like landlords of business tenants, need to get a certificate that says they're not harassing their tenants before the Department of Buildings can give them a permit to do things like demolitions or major construction work.
Right.
So that's kind of that was introduced by Vanessa Gibson, who represents Jerome Avenue and some areas that are really strongly affected by commercial tenant harassment. So that's one thing that it's a measure that already exists for housing law for residential tenants. And so this would like give us the same thing on the commercial side. And then another bill, there's one introduced by Mark Levine that would give legal representation to commercial tenants who are facing eviction. So that's another thing that already exists in housing court. Because we have the universal access program, it's not rolled out everywhere yet, but under the law, every residential tenant gets free legal representation if their landlord wants to evict them.
You know what's interesting to me about both of those items is that in terms of, let's say, the Jerome Avenue study or other places where commercial tenants feel in jeopardy potentially because of development, these are the kind of things that could put a doorstop in there and stop the door from closing on them. Which for me makes it very interesting because City Council, after all, voted for the rezoning, so it'd be very interesting if they support something that really would protect those tenants. I think that would be kind of a landmark moment. Are you following what I'm saying? I felt like I.
I think there's been a gajillion rezonings under De Blasio, as far as I can tell. And I guess there's always a lot of unintended consequences.
That's a good way to put it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like in New York City, sort of the commercial real estate business is, it's very powerful, and it can sort of like have a lot of impact.
Sure.
On pretty much anything that happens.
Yeah, we're seeing it in the Bronx. You know that. I mean, you talk to people in the Bronx, and we're certainly seeing the effects of that, and certainly fear that anytime something is done, there's, whether it be residents or commercial tenants, that they're going to be in jeopardy. So do we have a sense of how those bills are going, or what the timing is? And are we just waiting and seeing? I mean, maybe you can give us something, or we don't know yet.
I mean, certainly there's momentum behind them. So in terms of, how people perceive them, I'm sure that there's like some public support behind them. Currently they're in committee, so they're not in their final form yet.
So we don't know yet.
Yeah, so we don't know. So they haven't been approved by the committee to go before the full city council. But there seems to be a good amount of momentum among advocates, and I think, everyone is of course going to say, oh yeah, we support small businesses, we want small businesses to do well, et cetera, et cetera. But that's kind of easy to say. So
yeah, let's wait and see. This is exactly what I was saying, that some of the same elected officials who voted in for the kinds of rezonings or the kind, accept the kind of development that might displace people, are now going to say, we don't want to have to do that again. It's an interesting conflict for some of them. But before we move on, I just want to ask you. So, how many stories do you do for the Norwood News, and do you write often? Are you in there every day? Just what's kind of the situation? Just because we know we want to look it up and read whatever you do.
I'm in there a couple of days a week. I usually have 1 or 2 stories in there per issue.
So it's a good
Plus,
start. All right.
yeah.
The last thing I just want to ask you about, you wrote a little while back about the campaign to combat lead exposure beyond NYCHA. That's literally what your headline was, because we all know about the issues in public housing, but there is lead exposure elsewhere. So why don't you, we only have about a minute and a half left, why don't you just tell me a little bit about where that's at and what the protections the mayor is talking about might be like.
Right. So as much as NYCHA is very dysfunctional, there's still, that public oversight on it. But private housing has a lot of lead issues, and 98% of children with lead, with high lead levels in their blood, live in private housing. So this Lead-Free NYC campaign is is an effort to alleviate lead poisoning, particularly for children in private housing. So the health department is doing an awareness campaign and trying to get every apartment tested for lead. So not only 3 and above unit buildings, which is what current legislation allows for, but every single unit. So that's very ambitious, of course. And it doesn't seem like even the NYCHA apartments that are supposed to be tested for lead, not all of those that were scheduled for that have been tested. But yeah, in terms of the private housing, one particular risk, or one particular undercovered lead poisoning risk, is consumer products. So that can be ceramics, cosmetics, things like that. And members of the South Asian community, so South Asian immigrants or second generation, South Asian New Yorkers in general have higher levels of lead than the average New Yorker.
Right.
So there was a particular outreach campaign to them.
Well, let me ask you this. Some of the things that you talked about, let me ask you this. I got to wrap it up. Are you confident that the mayor has put enough teeth behind the Lead-Free New York City campaign?
I'm honestly not entirely confident of that.
Okay, fair answer. Listen, we gotta let you go. I hate to leave it on that note because there's a lot more to say about that. For me, a lot of the things you talked about, it's a matter of funding. And if we can get that funding, but it's nice to make the big pronouncement, and you covered the press conference, Lead-Free New York, et cetera, but if you don't put money to it, who knows? Anyway, we got to let you go. Emily Suzanne Lever, we're going to look forward to reading you in the Norwood News. Good luck in school. And whoever was walking behind you there, tell them next time, stop it, okay?
All right, I will. Thank you.
Emily, we'll see you around town. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to... There's a person where, I don't know, a couple of people were doing this business. We'll see you next time. Good night. Bronx Talk this week, campaign financing and the connection between money and politics in New York State. It's going to be a fascinating show today.